Everyone looked at him as if he were a simple ghost. But that night, the ghost woke up. I had spent years building walls around myself, polishing my name, shaping my reputation until it gleamed like glass under sterile light. I was Daniel Carter, a corporate lawyer feared in the courtroom, respected in negotiations, envied in boardrooms. People bowed to my words, but no one knew my silence. No one touched the hollow place that lived in me like a wound that had never closed. Success had given me everything I thought I wanted: power, wealth, a sharp suit of armor, but it had stolen the small voice that once whispered dreams into my childhood nights. I had forgotten who I was, or maybe I had buried it willingly. And yet, one encounter was enough to rip open the grave of my past. It began on a winter evening. I had left the firm late, as usual, briefcase heavy with other people's sins wrapped in contracts. The city streets were slick with rain, glowing in the amber haze of street lamps. I moved quickly, head down, lost in the endless hum of my phone. That was when I saw him, a boy no older than 10, sitting against the wall of a shuttered shop, his knees drawn to his chest, his thin shirt clinging wet against skin too frail for the cold. His eyes were strange, sharp, alert, burning with a fire that had no business belonging to a child so broken. I might have passed by. I might have walked into the night and buried the sight with all the other images of suffering we erase to keep breathing. But something about him stopped me cold. His face, it carried an echo, not a resemblance, but a memory. The jaw, the stubborn curve of the mouth, it was impossible. And yet it struck me like a fist. He reminded me of Michael. Michael, the only friend I had truly loved, the one who saved me from the wreckage of my own family when we were boys, the one I had lost too soon to an accident. I never learned to forgive. Michael's ghost lived in that child's expression. And before I could stop myself, I spoke. "What's your name?" My voice cracked in a way it never did before judges or billionaires. The boy looked at me with suspicion, like a stray animal weighing whether to flee. His voice was hoarse. "Ethan." Something twisted inside me. Ethan, Michael's son. It couldn't be. Yet as he blinked at me, I saw it. The same stubborn resilience, the same piercing gaze. Michael had a son. A son left alone on a wet sidewalk. I knelt, the rain soaking through my suit. "Ethan, do you know Michael Carter?" His lips trembled. He was my dad. The words were small, but they carved through me like a blade. He was my dad, past tense. Michael had died years ago. I knew that. But no one had told me about the boy. No one had told me that the bloodline of my only true friend had been abandoned to the hunger of the streets. "Where's your mother?" I asked. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Instead, his small hand clutched at a plastic bag beside him, as if it contained his last thread of safety. Inside, through the fog of the plastic, I saw a crumpled photograph. My breath froze. It was Michael and me, teenagers, standing arm in arm, laughing at a summer fair. Ethan had been carrying my ghost all along. I took him that night, though the world would say I had no right. I bought him food he barely touched, a coat too big for his shoulders. I tried to smile, but he stared as if kindness itself was a trap. He had learned too well that it often was. When I asked again about his mother, he whispered one word that chilled me more than the winter wind. Gone. The weeks that followed stripped away everything I thought I knew about myself. Ethan was not a quiet shadow. He was flame wrapped in wounds. He distrusted every gesture, flinched at sudden sounds, and woke screaming from dreams he never described. He devoured books when he thought no one was looking, tracing words with a hunger that reminded me of Michael. His intelligence was sharp, frighteningly so, yet his eyes carried scars older than his years. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to speak, piece by piece. His mother had fallen into addiction after Michael's death, lured by a man who promised salvation but delivered only ruin. That man became her captor, and Ethan's. I knew the name before he said it. Richard Hall, a petty tyrant, a parasite with a history of exploiting those weaker than himself. Once, years ago, I had faced him in court and won. He had never forgiven me. Now he had found another way to poison my life. Ethan had been the victim of Hale's cruelty, neglect, manipulation, sometimes worse. When his mother finally succumbed to her demons, Hale kept Ethan under his roof, not out of care but control. When the boy dared to resist, Hale cast him out. He survived on scraps on the streets until I found him. Or perhaps until he found me. The decision to keep him with me was less a choice than a command whispered by something greater. The law, however, did not bend so easily. Guardianship, custody, rights words that could build cages as surely as they could free. I began the process, pulling strings, filing motions. But Hale was not silent. He appeared, sharp-suited, smiling that false smile I had seen across a courtroom years ago. He claimed Ethan as his dependent, his beloved ward, painting me as a thief who sought to steal the child for selfish reasons. He had money, connections, lies polished to shine. The battle began. I had argued contracts worth millions, defended corporations against governments. But nothing compared to standing in that sterile family court, with Ethan's small hand gripping mine, his eyes wide with fear. Hale's lawyers painted me as unstable, obsessed with the memory of a dead friend, unfit to care for a child. They waved documents, affidavits, stories woven from shadows. And sometimes, in the quiet of my own doubt, I almost believed them. At night, when the city hushed, I heard Ethan whisper in the dark. Not words, but whimpers, fragments of nightmares. I sat outside his room, listening, powerless. One night, I heard him sob a name. Dad, the word broke me. I could not be Michael. I could not erase his pain, but I could fight. I threw myself into it with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. My career, my reputation, they became weapons I no longer cared to protect. I dug into Hale's history, unearthed debts, testimonies, records of his cruelty, hidden beneath legal smokescreens. Each piece was a shard of light, but the darkness was vast. Hale countered with smear campaigns, whispers in the press, old rumors about me twisted into poison. My name began to crack. Clients withdrew. Colleagues distanced themselves. I became the man no one wanted to touch. But Ethan stayed. He watched me fall, and though fear still shadowed his eyes, there were moments small, fleeting, when he looked at me not with suspicion, but with something like trust. He began to speak more openly, fragments of memory, nights when Hale had locked him in basements, days when his hunger was ignored, words that should never belong to a child. Each confession ignited a fire I could not extinguish. The trial neared its climax. I knew the law could betray us, but I clung to faith in truth. The last hearing approached, the day when the court would decide Ethan's fate. I prepared with everything I had, evidence stacked like towers of hope. Yet the night before, Ethan vanished. I came home to silence. His room was empty, the window ajar. Panic swallowed me whole. I searched the streets, called every contact, but he was gone. And then the message arrived. A photograph on my phone, Ethan, pale and terrified, seated in the back of a car I recognized too well. Hale's. My heart stopped. Hale had taken him back, not through law but force. And tomorrow, in court, he would parade Ethan as proof of his guardianship, silencing the boy with threats no one else could see. The walls closed in. I had fought battles all my life, but never against this abyss. That night, I sat alone in the dark, my hands trembling, my reflection fractured in the glass of a forgotten drink. For the first time, I felt the edge of despair. I had promised Michael I would protect what he left behind. Now I had failed. But as the hours bled into dawn, a memory stirred Michael's voice, laughing in the wind, saying, "Daniel, you don't walk away. Not from the people you love." I stood. I had one last fight left in me, and I would burn everything to bring Ethan home. The morning of the hearing arrived like a blade pressed to my throat. I had not slept. My body moved on instinct, carrying me through motions I barely felt: suit, tie, case files. But my mind was fire and storm. Ethan was out there, somewhere between Hale's grip and the promise of freedom, and every second mattered. I entered the courthouse to whispers. The gallery was crowded, reporters sensing blood in the water. My name had become a spectacle. Once a feared litigator, now a man accused of obsession, of stealing another man's ward. I felt their eyes crawling over me, waiting for the fall. And then he walked in. Hale, smug, polished, a hand gripping Ethan's shoulder as if the boy were property. Ethan's eyes met mine for a flicker of a second, wide with terror, then fell to the floor. Hale smiled at me, a serpent savoring its meal. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Arguments were made, papers exchanged, accusations sharpened like knives. Hale's lawyers painted me as a man unraveling, my grief for Michael twisted into delusion. They claimed I sought to rewrite history, to steal Ethan to atone for my own failures. Hale himself spoke, voice dripping with false sorrow. He painted a portrait of himself as a loving guardian, misunderstood, persecuted by a vengeful lawyer. Some nodded in the gallery. Lies are seductive when they wear suits. I rose, my voice steady, though my inside shook. I spoke of truth, of evidence, of the scars no file could capture. I laid bare Hale's debts, his history of cruelty, the testimonies of neighbors and teachers who had seen Ethan's bruises. But even as I spoke, I saw doubt in the judge's eyes. Without Ethan's voice, the truth was a fragile thing. And then the moment came. The judge turned to Ethan, asking softly if he wished to speak. The courtroom stilled. Hale's hand tightened on his shoulder. Ethan's lips parted, then closed. His eyes flicked to Hall, then to me. For a heartbeat, he was silent, trapped between fear and hope. I leaned forward, my voice low but clear. "Ethan, you're not alone. Not anymore." Something shifted. Perhaps it was Michael's ghost standing between us. Perhaps it was the fire I had seen in Ethan from the first night. He straightened, small shoulders trembling, and spoke. His voice was thin, but it cut through the silence like glass. "He hurt me." The words shattered the courtroom. Gasps rose, pens scratched, the judge's eyes hardened. Ethan continued, his voice breaking, but unstoppable now. He spoke of nights locked away, of hunger ignored, of his mother's slow descent, while Hall watched with indifference. He spoke of fear, but also of the nights he had spent in my home, where for the first time he felt safe enough to dream. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but his words were sharp, undeniable. When he finished, silence hung heavy. Hale's mask cracked. He surged to his feet, shouting denials, calling Ethan a liar, calling me a manipulator. His rage betrayed him. Security intervened. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. The ruling came swift, a tide I could scarcely believe. Custody granted to me. Hale stripped of rights, charges pending. Ethan was free, but freedom is not a door that opens all at once. It is a slow, hesitant step into light. In the days that followed, Ethan barely spoke. He slept fitfully, waking with cries that tore at my heart. At times he clung to me with desperate fear. At others he recoiled, lost in shadows I could not reach. I learned patience I never knew I had. I learned that healing is not a verdict, but a battle fought each day in silence. I gave him space, but also presence. I sat beside him while he read, cooked meals he sometimes ignored, walked with him through quiet parks where the world seemed gentler. Slowly, painfully, trust grew. He began to laugh, small bursts at first, like fragile glass bells. He began to dream aloud, speaking of wanting to draw, to study, to become something more than the scars left on him. And in his eyes, I began to see Michael again, not the ghost of what was lost, but the spark of what could be reborn. The world, however, did not forget. Whispers followed me still, scars on my reputation that no court ruling could erase. Clients were gone, cases dissolved. I was no longer the Daniel Carter who had ruled the courtroom, but I no longer cared. My life had found its meaning not in contracts or verdicts, but in a boy who reminded me that love is the only legacy worth leaving. Years passed. Ethan grew. He was no longer the fragile child I found on a rain-soaked night, but a young man with a fierce heart and a mind sharp as lightning. He studied with a hunger that astonished his teachers. He painted with colors that seemed to bleed from his very soul. He carried his scars, but not his chains. He wore them as proof of survival. One evening, as we sat together overlooking the city lights, he asked me a question I had never expected. "Why did you stay? You could have walked away." Everyone else did. I looked at him, at the boy who had become my son in everything but blood. "Because your father saved me once. When I was a boy, lost in my own darkness, he gave me a reason to believe I mattered. And when I saw you, Ethan, I knew this was my chance to repay what I could never repay him. But more than that, I stayed because you're worth it. Every fight, every scar. You're worth everything." His eyes glistened, and for the first time, he whispered words I had never dared hope to hear. "Dad, it was not a replacement for Michael. It was not borrowed. It was his gift, his choice. And it healed something in me I had not known was still broken. In time, we built more than a life. We built a purpose. Together, we founded the Carter Foundation, an organization dedicated to children like Ethan, children lost in systems that failed them, children abandoned to cruelty and silence. We created shelters, schools, safe havens. We fought in courts, on streets, in hearts. And every time I saw Ethan stand before a crowd, telling his story with strength that once seemed impossible, I knew Michael was smiling somewhere. The years turned, but one truth never faded. Pain can devour, but it can also forge. Love can resurrect what despair buries. And family is not blood, but choice, forged in the fire of sacrifice and trust. Now, as I speak these words, I am older. My hands tremble, my body slower. But Ethan, my son, walks tall, carrying the torch we lit together. He has become the man Michael would have been proud of, and more. And when the world asks me what I accomplished, I no longer speak of trials won or wealth gained. I speak of one night in the rain, of a boy's haunted eyes, of a choice to stop walking past. The ghost that once haunted me has been laid to rest, and in its place burns a light that will not die. Because in the end, we are not measured by the battles we win in courtrooms or the fortunes we build in towers of glass. We are measured by the lives we choose to lift from the ashes, by the love we refuse to abandon. And that is the legacy I leave.